Thanks, George. So anyway, we think we're here for this 90 minutes. Listen, think about, analyze, contemplate, internalize, if we choose to, this information. So listen to it as advice. You don't have to take it because you're the boss, but it is advice. Think of it like that. Then it becomes rich. And what's the advice for? To help us put ourselves together so we can help others. Think like that. That's our motivation. So I wonder if anybody has something they want to ask, which can be the first thing we talk about, just in case if there's a burning issue anywhere. Eileen, you're good at having something. What's on your mind? Nothing? Unmute, babe. Does she have to be told to unmute?
I got it. Okay, I have it.
Anything on your mind, Eileen?
Yes, because we were talking about the two truths last time.
Oh, good. Thank you for reminding me. I didn't remember.
Okay.
Good, go on. Good.
And you had said that, that form is emptiness and emptiness is form.
Okay. All right.
So that, in other words, rather than see it as a separate reality, ultimately, they're the same in a way. It's just that we don't experience it the same way because...
That's exactly right. So you want me to talk more about that, do you?
No, I just wanted to because I was reading a lot about, the moment of death, of course, the aggregates, everything starts dissolving, as it were,
Right.
So the question I have is, when we do go into the bardos, etc., what is going into the bardo? Our mental continuum or...
okay. I hear it.
Okay.
This gets us, Brenda and I were having a discussion just now at lunch about what is it? What is the mind? What is it? So this is a really important point because we all have a different, when we say I or person, we have all a different view about that. So if you're a Christian, you think about the soul that God gave you. And if you're a materialist, you think it is about the physical body and that you came from mummy and daddy. So we have this kind of implicit, unexpressed thought of what we think I is, So then let's look at the Buddhist view, because this is all related. It's all totally the point you're talking about. What is it? This is really helps to understand karma. What does it mean by what practices karma? What lives a life? What dies? So what is a person, in other words? What is an I? You can talk about what a computer is. A computer is, we can give it a name, then we define what it is, say its components, and then we say its function. So you define something. And this is a really interesting point. Because Buddha's deal in the long term, his long-term deal, the deal that underpins everything, all practice, is to get in touch with how things exist, which sounds very abstract to us. Why on earth would I want to get in touch with how things exist? Do you want me to be a scientist or something? It doesn't make sense to us initially. But what's fascinating is another way of saying what Buddha's on about is how to get happy and how to stop suffering. And then he says the method. This is an interesting point. Buddha's methodology for how to get happy and stop suffering is to get in touch with reality, because he's saying we suffer because we're not in touch with reality. And that's a big surprise to us. We thought we suffered because the world is horrible. We thought we suffered because the boyfriend cheated on us, So then we have to look at what it is that is this I that suffers. What is this I that gets happy? And this is a really crucial point. We can't just take our assumptions from Jesus or, Allah, or Freud, or, Einstein. We've got to take Buddha's view because it's very specific. So, in relation to discovering how things exist, in order to stop suffering, it's not just about the I, it's about everything. So Buddha's telling us that in the mind, we're going to discuss this, in the mind, there are these neurotic, deluded misconceptions about how things exist. And some of them are emotional, some are just intellectual, some are philosophical views that are mistaken, that are not in sync with how things exist. This is what Buddhism is. Buddhism is a worldview, actually, but is a presentation of Buddha's own direct experiential findings from his own direct experiential mind about how things exist. That really is what Buddhism is. It's a worldview. What is happiness? What is suffering? What is the mind? What is a person? What is a thing? How do they exist? This is exactly the stuff, from the big picture point of view of what Buddhism is. So if we're not in touch with reality, if we're not in touch with how things exist, then how do you start with that? And that's the discussion. Thank you for reminding me. Really helpful, Eileen. Last we started discussing this. One way of framing the entire universe is in terms of the two truths. And this is directly related to getting the ultimate truth, emptiness, the final stages of our practice, So the first thing is, if you're not in touch with how things exist, the first thing is to establish conventionally what is something that exists. What is that? What's that? I always use the same example. What is that? Well, Mummy, what's that? I was saying. She said it's called a cup. Then I asked her to give me a definition, obviously. Well, sweetheart, you can see that, and a definition has two parts. You could say it this way. The first part tells you its conventional characteristics. Well, as you can see, sweetheart, she'll say, it's made of clay. It's a container. You can see it's got sides, a base. Forget the lid part, doesn't matter, it's a different thing. Sometimes it has a handle. And you can see conventionally, that's what it is, this clay container. You can see that. That's the first part of the definition, conventional facts. But then you're not happy with it. You've got to get the second part of the definition. And this is the major piece. But Mummy, what is it? What does it do? What is its function? What's its job? Darling, it holds my tea. Now, don't believe her. We believe anything anyone tells us. I mean, we're living in La La Land. Look at the internet these days. I mean, there's so many conspiracy theories about the universe. It's just people gone mad. And people believe anything they're told. We have no intelligence whatsoever. It's like shocking. Don't believe your mother. She has to prove it. Because you can't just, this is why it is crucial to understand the difference between the Christian teaching, and I'm not complaining. I loved God when I was a Catholic. I'm not complaining. It's a very different view philosophically. Reality in Catholicism, in Christianity, and in Islam is the creation of God. God, this being, all-knowing, all-seeing, all-compassionate, all-wise, creates the universe. This is such a different view, it's even hard to even get your head around it. This is not Buddha's view. Buddha does not posit a creator. He argues with it. He says it's a misconception. It's one of the major misconceptions, he says. It's not true. He gives all logical reasons why. He says reality is natural law. Now we say, oh, that's science. Back in the days of Galileo and that mob, he started moving away from God's law, and it was very shocking. He practically got burned at the stake. He dared to argue with God's findings. Isn't it? He started proving natural law. So eventually now we've got science over here, which is the real one, which we think is intelligent and reasonable, and way over here there's wacky old religion, which we pay no attention to. Why? It's because it's belief. And because God is all about reality, but God is this being who creates the universe, creates me, creates the rules, and runs the show. I'm not criticizing, but that ain't Buddha's view at all. Nothing like that. So naturally your job isn't to discover the nature of reality. That's God's job. Mind your own business and have faith in God. And again, I'm not complaining, but that's not the Buddha's view. So you believe in God. You believe that God has got a plan because God made the damn place. So he's got a plan. He made the whole universe. He's got a plan. He's got a plan for you because he loves you. Nothing wrong with some of those teachings. They're marvelous. And he keeps his plan in his pocket. He doesn't have to share his plan with you. That's why if you've really got faith in God, everything is God's will. I think that if you're a Christian, that is the only conclusion. Muslim the same. Only conclusion, God's will. Now, I think it's an incredible teaching and it's logical. So then the reality, the main job there in being a Christian is not get in touch with reality, is learn what God has done and said, and whatever, but you have faith in God. Nothing wrong, not complaining, but that's not the Buddhist view. So if we are wrong, if we're not in touch with reality, if we're not in touch with how things exist, and then this is why we suffer, which is a really interesting point, very fascinating. We better start. How do we start? Well, this is the two truths one. This is the conventional reality. This is the first one. And then the ultimate. So the shorthand for conventional is dependent arising, one term they use, that everything that does exist exists in dependence upon. various factors. And Buddha describes 3 as direct arguments with the prevailing views at the time that he diverged from. So the first one is that everything exists in dependence upon causes. This is where karma comes in. So the law of karma is the law of cause and effect in relation to what produces this phenomenon. A person, the combination of a body and a mind. That's a person, a mind possessor. It's a lovely word, a sentient being. This word in Tibetan is very delicious. I love it. Mind possessor, sem chen. So that the name given to that type of phenomenon is person or sentient being. Well, person really is bigger than sentient being because persons, there's 2 kinds, enlightened ones and ordinary ones. We're just speaking loosely here. So, okay, we've got to get in touch with what a person is and how they exist. We've got to get in touch with what a mug is and how it exists. We've got to get in touch with whatever exists, because the mistake that misconceives the reality of an eye is the same misconception of a mug. So to establish how things exist in order to stop suffering, this is the point behind it, not just to pass your exam and be some clever fellow, it's to stop suffering. It's the reason. It's very fascinating. So you establish first, what is a mug? You label it, mug or cup. You define it. First part is conventional characteristics, flat bottom clay container. Second part, its job. It holds my tea. That's its job. That's what it is. That's what defines it. That's the point, isn't it? So the Buddha is telling us everything that exists, everything you posit as existing has to be like that. You know, it has to be real. It has to have it. You have to define it, label it, define it, and say its function. Otherwise, it doesn't exist. It's a really interesting point. It's a really interesting point. So Buddha would say a creator doesn't exist. And to give all the logical reasons, you go into this and debate on it and meditate on it, not just to be clever and go against Christians and Muslims, but to discover reality, because it's a misconception. There are levels of misconceptions. There are misconceptions that are also negative and harmful. They're heavy-duty ones. So the very first level of dependent arising for the Buddha, which is an argument against the prevailing view that there is something that is existing called a create God or an essence, and a self. They call it Atman. Christians call it a soul. Greeks call it an essence. And we call it ego. I'm not sure, but we're not so specific in the materialist world about that. But there's other views. There is that they say there is something in there. Everything is something in everything. But let's talk about the person instead. Forget the mug. For the person. So the person is person is a label. I, person, self, me, myself are all terms that are synonymous that refer to this type of phenomenon. Mug is what refers to that phenomenon. Computer is what refers to that phenomenon. So the law of cause and effect, the law of karma, is a brilliant example of the first level of dependent arising, that things exist in terms of causes. So I always remember when I first studied Buddhist philosophy with Geshe Tekchok, my philosophy teacher, and he used the example of the phenomenon called Robina, which of course is why I remember it. You know, he said the person called Robina can be said to be that everything in the universe before that is a cause of that of that phenomenon, and that's not you can prove that. So what's Robina? The name given for this particular body and mind combined together. Now, what's one of the main causes of this person? Think of it as my mother. And what's the cause of my mum? So many causes. I mean, just think in terms of mothers. My mother could not exist if there weren't her mother. And that mother could not exist without her mother. And that mother could not exist without her mother. And you keep going back, you're not going to find the first mother, I promise. And eventually you go to all the different things of the different causes and conditions, the causes that produce this Robina. You eventually get the entire universe covered. If you do that really rigorously, dependent arising in terms of causes. And that's arguing with a particular view that there is a self, an Atman, that is not caused, that is unchanging and uncaused. No such thing. Same with the creator. No such thing. Can't be, Buddha would say, not viable. Because there can't be a first cause. We all want a first cause. We are all frantically desperate. When did it begin? When did I begin? When did suffering begin? When did happiness begin? When did the universe begin? It's a misconception. It's the wrong question. There can't be such a first thing. Big Bang first, sort of thing. As Solomon said, with all the scientists. Big Bang, no problem. Just not the first Big Bang. That's all. So this is the part that's really ridiculous, but intellectually it's quite logical. By definition, you cannot find a first cause because a first cause is one that doesn't have a previous cause. How can we find that if you posit cause and effect? Impossible. I know the Catholics, my Catholic friend, priest friend, there's intensive discussions in their philosophical religion, their philosophy about how there can be a first cause, which is called God. Not viable for the Buddha. It's a misconception. And this is an interesting point. Buddha doesn't argue with the ability to have a being that's infinitely wise, compassionate, and powerful. That's Buddha, but they don't have a job of being a creator. Very different. This is a phenomenon. We don't need creating, Buddha says. We do fine creating ourselves. This is the law of karma. So this is why the wackiest idea on the planet is that your consciousness is beginningless. It's like hilarious, but so is everything. This mug, we imagine there's a first Big Bang somewhere of mugs, something like that vaguely. But if you keep tracking back, let's stick to I. When did I begin? Well, the conventional package called Robina, which is the combination of this body and this mind, did definitely begin at a certain time, maybe the beginning of conception. Maybe you can say that's the beginning of this particular package, isn't it? When the Buddhists would say when the egg and sperm come together, and the consciousness came from the previous and ran into that egg and sperm and caused them to join together and to begin to multiply and to grow and to become the fetus of Robina. You could say like that. But that came from previous, didn't it? The body came from mummy and daddy. No argument there. And now let's track back the physical world. The body, the egg and sperm of Robina, the egg and sperm of my mother and father. Where did all that come from? Well, from my mother's mother. And that came from the previous mother and the previous mother and the previous mother and the previous mother. And we keep thinking you get back to the first one. But it's quite hard to say how you can, Well, you can't go back to nothing. You can't get back to nothing. And the Buddha would definitely, you can't go back to a previous person who is the cause of that. That's why the idea that your mother and father make you into Buddha is just plain ridiculous. And he doesn't say it like that. He's polite. Because why? Because what are the components of a person? The components of a person are two, body and mind. So this is why the Vajrayana model is quite helpful to understand. It describes the physical world in terms of the four elements. That's how it used to be with Galileo and that mob. It's still the same with the Chinese acupuncture one, the Ayurvedic one, Tibetan medical system. There's the physical world, and then there are minds. The entire universe or universes consist of matter, the four elements, and minds. Consciousnesses. These words are synonymous, pretty much. So what's a mind? It's a term referring to, if you like, the capacity for cognition. It is not physical. It is not the handiwork of another person. This is the nuttiest idea. It is not the handiwork of a creator or mummy or daddy, which are the two main options on the planet. Neither of those. A mind is its own continuity. So think of it simply as a river of mental moments, like a chain of links. And each moment is a link, So this moment of my cognition can only come, the main cause of this moment of this cognition is necessarily the very millionth of a trillionth of a second before that. And that moment of cognition, this chain and this unbroken chain of links of mental moments comes from a previous moment, which comes from a previous moment, comes from a previous moment. And if you had perfect memory, you could track it back inexorably to the first second of conception, an unbroken chain of mental moments. Every millisecond of what you think and do and say, you put into this mind stream, they call it. And everything you put into that mind is in that mind. Like if you play piano every day, you're programming that mind with music. It's not as if I get up tomorrow and start playing piano because you practice it. That's demented. It's not as if your anger makes me, suddenly start practicing anger. No, it's your anger. So our minds are very personal. Everything we put into the mind stays in the mind. This is what's fascinating. In two ways. One is in this simple, practical sense that everything you think and do and say is stored in your mind like a memory, stored in your memory bank, not your brain, in the mind. And second, it's got the qualitative one of karma. Whatever you put into your mind based on the motivation leaves seeds in the mind that ripen as future fruits, if you like, future experiences in that mind. So it's obvious if you play piano every day, don't be surprised if you turn up to be a musician. Like, wow, not rocket science, is it? So what goes on in the mind produces the future experiences in that mind. So you keep tracking the mind back, and you keep track the matter back. Egg and sperm from previous mother, previous egg, previous sperm, physical, coming from previous physical, always, and physical can become a subtle level too. But you can't possibly, not logically, find a moment before which there was nothing. You can't do that. It's not possible, because how can nothing produce something? Even meaning nothing existing. Something is something and nothing is nothing. You know, you can't. If there is something, that something has to have previous causes. So then we've got the mind, same thing. Continuity of these thoughts and feelings and emotions and unconscious and subconscious and instinct and intuition, the whole spectrum of one's mental experiences and sensory experiences in the mind. This river of mental moments goes back and back. And then before, so the second conception, the second before conception, the egg was in mummy's body, sperm was in daddy's body. And where was the mind? It was at a subtle level, obviously, and it was a previous moment of that continuity of mind, and then a previous life before that, and then a previous life before that, and so on and so forth. I mean, this is like science fiction for us. And there's no beginning. There can't be, logically. As nutty as it sounds to us, even as I say it, I'm kind of embarrassed to admit it. It sounds so silly, I'll be laughed at, you know. It sounds hilarious. But you can't argue with it. The God one is a pretty powerful argument. Everything comes from God, not from Buddha. No concept like that. So the mind, the name mind is referred to your capacity for cognition. Capacity for cognition. And then it's conjoined with its own set of the four elements. This is the Vajrayana. It's similar to the Sutra teachings, but it's got a different way of presenting. It's combined inextricably with its own set of the four elements. Inextricably linked. So you've got, in that Vajrayana model, you've got gross consciousness, the coarsest level of our cognition, which is sensory consciousness. So clearly that exists interdependently, inextricably linked with the gross bag of bones, isn't it? Sensory, you can only have eye consciousness, which is your mind, which is not physical. It can only exist in dependence upon an eyeball and all the bits and pieces working nicely. So the physical and the mental inextricably linked, physical and the consciousness, because consciousness has two levels of cognition: sensory consciousness, which is the grossest level, and then mental consciousness. Mental and sensory. So the sensory is the gross consciousness and linked to the gross physical, which is the five senses. And that's the level we live at. That's what we think is real. That's what we think all there is that. As we make the body the boss, as Lama Zopa said, you know. We believe that's who I am. And it is, but it's only it's the tip of the iceberg of who you are, both mentally and physically. Buddha would assert subtle consciousness. Now we don't call it that. That's your mental states. And they have got much subtler levels of cognition than the sensory. The sensory, like dumb animals, not being rude to animals. So like I always use the example, when I look at that mug, my eye consciousness goes there, but I will say, wow, what a pretty mug. And we assume my eye consciousness, in fact, my eyeball is seeing a pretty mug. Absolute nonsense. All it can cognize, the sensory consciousnesses are really limited. All they can cognize is shape and color. Ear consciousness can only cognize mere sound, no quality, no color, there's no sort of nuance, very limited. But we give incredible power to our senses, don't we? We assume I see a pretty mug. You don't. So you've got to ask the question, this is the point here, about what part of your mind is cognizing a very pretty mug. Well, that's your mental consciousness. That's where the workshop is, as Lama Zopa says. That's where all your thoughts and feelings and emotions and unconscious and subconscious instinct, intuition, and all the other levels of mind we haven't begun to even think about, that Buddha would assert exist, which we can access through single point of concentration. That's your mental consciousness. That's where the workshop is. So it's quicker than Google. The millisecond my eyes go there, quicker than Google, because everything I've ever seen and touched and heard and said and thought about is stored in my mind. That's how I can remember anything. That's how I can remember anything, because it's stored as a memory. I've trained my mind to like certain things, to see certain things certain ways. So then up will come the concept, what a pretty mug. Well, it's a thought, isn't it? And this is where we get into reality now. This is where we get to what reality is. We know 4 different people can look with their same eyes, all good-looking working eyes, and each will come with a different view. One will say it's ugly. A colorblind person will say it's pink. Another person will say it's beautiful. We all know that. We all know that. It's enough to prove emptiness if we thought about it, if we joined the dots. Because we all have a different conception about it. So this is mental consciousness now. This is mental consciousness. The workshop is. That's where and now this is the thing. Mental consciousness has 2 levels of functioning. Or there's levels and levels, but basically there's conceptual mental consciousness, concepts, thoughts, all our thoughts and feelings and emotions. That's conceptual, and that's a big surprise when you think anger and love are included there. Their conception. We've talked about this a lot. That's mental consciousness at a gross level, conceptuality, which is thoughts, opinions, viewpoints. So that is a pretty mug, is a viewpoint, is a thought, is a concept, is an idea, is an opinion. And we live at the level of opinions, viewpoints. And this is Buddha's point. Some are valid because they exist, and some are not because they don't exist. And that's the job, if you like, of being a Buddhist, is to sort out facts from fiction. And when you're in touch with reality, what does exist at the subtlest and the grossest level, that's what enlightenment is. It sounds hilarious, but this is how they talk. So gross consciousness is sensory, and then the inextricably into the body. Then you've got subtle consciousness, and this is the death process. As you go through the death process, as you go through the 8 stages of death, the first stage, your eyes cease, and then various your physical elements, your body begins to break down. Then your ear consciousness, and the different things happen in each of the senses. By the time you stop breathing, which is the 4th of the 8, by that point, your eyes, your ears, your nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, and touch consciousness have all ceased. Your gross consciousness has ceased. And that's what we think is dead. When you're not dead yet, not for the Buddha, not for this Vajrayana model way of describing it. Your sensory consciousness has ceased. Your gross physical body has ceased. The heart has stopped. The lungs have stopped breathing. The heart stopped beating. It's true. All that, the physical has stopped. But that's just the tip of the iceberg of the person. That's the gross level. And that's the only one we posit in our modern scientific views. I mean, looking into these other ones with all these marvelous conversations with His Holiness and the best brains in the West, they're having marvelous conversations about exactly this. And now the Westerners, out of surprise, are learning there's some more knowledge in the world besides what came from the West, the arrogant scientists. I mean, the arrogant Western people, white people. You understand what I'm saying? So subtle consciousness is your mental consciousness, which means your thoughts and feelings and emotions. They're the grosser level. So this is why a person, we know this. This sleep process is the same process that occurs at death, exactly the same level of deconstruction of the various components. So by the time you go to sleep, by the time you stop, you don't totally stop breathing, because death is more radical, isn't it? You stop breathing. But sleep, your breathing really calms down. You open a person's eyelid, they can't see because their consciousness is, the wind energies that's linked to their different states of mind have absorbed. We'll go into this, we'll discuss this. So that the person looks like they're dead, but that's just the gross consciousness has ceased. But the mental states are still there. And that's why a person who's fast asleep can have vivid dreams. That's your mental consciousness. Vivid dreams. Even when you're as fast asleep, you can also hear things. I always remember this. This is not uncommon. I remember a time I did retreat when I first became a nun. And I had these vivid dreams. It was a 3-month retreat in Tushita in Dharamsala. I mean, I'm no meditator, but if you sit there for 12 hours a day meditating for 3 months, something has to happen. You understand? You either go crazy or make everybody else crazy. It was pretty intense. Meanwhile, I had these vivid dreams. People call them lucid dreaming. It's your mental consciousness. I was fast asleep, but I could hear everything that was going on around me. In the kitchen, the people talking, the words, the sounds, that's not uncommon. People can even see things the same because your mental consciousness is more powerful than your senses. People dream incredible experiences. People can have clairvoyant experiences. Your mental consciousness is much more powerful. But we haven't begun to access its power, you know. We live at the grosser level of conceptual thoughts. So mental consciousness is other level of functioning, which is called perception, which is a typical word in English, but it's very specific here. It's referring to non-conceptual. We can't posit that in our culture. There's no equivalent in modern psychology or neuroscience. It's beyond conceptual. It's a much subtle level of cognition, and we can access that when we get single point of concentration, this genius technique these Indians invented before the Buddha. You know. When you can completely subdue the grosser level of both the sensory and the grosser level of the mental, which is conceptuality, you completely calm that down, cease it, and you go access this microscope of your mind, if you like, which is the mental consciousness. It's not conceptual, that is not sensory, does not depend upon a brain. And the death process, you go through this naturally. But of course, because we're not used to doing it, we just fall asleep and we wake up next day, 8 hours later, or wake up in another body forgetting it all, you know, because we're not conscious of going through this process, but we can learn to. These amazing techniques in the Vajrayana are all about this, learning how to work through this process and keep access to their mind and keep powerful, keep control, so you can die with complete control and be in charge of what goes on. You know, we're capable of this. All these techniques enable us to do this. It's amazing in the Vajrayana. So your death process, you stop breathing. That's just the gross consciousness cease. Now your mental consciousness goes through these final other stages, 4 stages of getting more subtle, more subtle, more subtle, all the different states, mental states ceasing, gradually ceasing. And that mental consciousness is inextricably linked to a subtle physical level. The gross conscious and gross body, there's a subtle mind, which is the mental, and then the subtle body, they call it subtle body. So that means we've got this 72,000 subtle channels. This is the same as the Ayurveda one, the Tibetan medical, similar to the Chinese one. This subtle nervous system, 72,000 subtle channels going throughout an entire body, through which are coursing all these different wind energies, prana, the subtle of the physical energies of the 4 elements. And linked to all those different wind energies are our different states of mental consciousness. So my mental states are inextricably linked to their own set of the 4 elements. So this is why when your Tibetan doctor feels your pulses, she can feel the imbalance of certain winds in these channels, and she knows that's related to your attachment. That's why you're having anxiety and panic attacks. This other one's related to your anger. This other one's related to all of your different states of mind. She can feel the relationship between those winds and the states of mind. So by giving herbal medicine, you calm the winds down, which helps calm the mind down, you know, so integrated. So these mental states of death gradually cease, ever more subtle, until eventually you get to the 8th of the 8 stages, and that's very subtle consciousness, or they call it extremely subtle consciousness, the subtlest level of our capacity for cognition. All the grosser levels of mental states have ceased, all the sensory have ceased, all the grosser levels have ceased, and now you get to this very subtle, or the clear light mind, they call it, which is the subtlest level of our cognition, the subtlest. And it's in that too is inextricably linked with this very subtle physical energy, the subtle wind. And these are inextricably linked. Inextricably. It's just the way it is. This is reality, they say. This is Buddha's observation. So then that consciousness programmed by your karmic tendencies then leaves the body, and then based upon the karma that was triggered before you even stop breathing, program will then find its way to your new mother's womb when she hops into bed with your daddy, you know, or wherever she hops, or wherever they put the egg and sperm these days. And all this discussion, actually, I remember talking to different geshis. Some geshis will talk about how the egg and the sperm in the Petri dish, the mind cannot go there. It's only when the egg and the sperm are put into the human body that the consciousness will then go there. But others have said that the consciousness can go there even in the Petri dish. So that means that is a human being beginning. That would be difficult to chuck those down the toilet. But if it's not yet a human being, because the mind hasn't gone there until it gets into the mother's body, then it's not a human being. You can chuck them down the toilet. So they have to discuss all this, you know. So we have gross consciousness inextricably with the gross body. We have subtle consciousness inextricably with our subtle wind energies, these channels, winds, and these drops in the body, different things, different components. We've got gross conscious, subtle, and very subtle. So that very subtle conscious program with your karmic tendencies then finds its way to your new mother. Programmed well and truly already. No, she doesn't make you. She's just lying there with your father, having fun. And you come barging in. Don't blame them. And this is Buddha's view. This is the view. This is the view. You know, this is the view. He might be wrong. You have to find out, don't you? So, person. A person is a combination of body and mind. And a sentient being is a regular person, a deluded one. You're not like a Buddha mind. You're a Buddha person. That's different. So we'll just use the person in general, though. So the word person. Let's look at this phenomenon. Person is a label we give to this phenomenon, a combination of body and mind, which is the conventional characteristics. And what's the function of a person? I don't know what the definition is. That does actions, I think. That creates causes, I think. I'm not sure what the function is. Like the function of the cup is to hold tea. I think mind, a sentient being, creates karma. I forget the function. So, okay, so what are we talking about here? So that's this talking, blah, blah. Where was I going with this? So I was moving somewhere with all this. So this is conventionally, we're trying to establish how things exist conventionally. This is Buddha's view of conventional. It's a very different view. It's obvious. It's hilarious talking about subtle channels and continuity of consciousness and, you know, no creator and beginningless. It's like a hilarious view. It's completely different. But this is Buddha's view. It's his worldview, you know. And it's coming from his experience. He is not a creator. He did not get it from revelation. He did not make it up. That's very rude. To think that Einstein made it up, you should throw him into prison immediately for being a fraud. We know that Einstein observed something. Buddha's the same, identical. And if he observed it, so can you, honey. So these are the myths. Buddha would suggest that this is his view about how things exist, that argue with the view of a creator, that argue with the view of the materialism. He's not being fundamentalist. He's not being sectarian. He's not trying to make trouble. He says it's not reality. It's not true, he says. This is what he says is true. And he's allowed to say that. Everybody's allowed to say what they think is real or not. Then it's up to us to prove it. Not to believe it. That's absurd. No believing involved. To prove it. It's either right or it's wrong. It's either just like that or it doesn't. It's up to you to find out. You're the boss. So, okay. So this is putting conventional reality together. Buddha's observation of how things exist conventionally. And if he can even sort things out conventionally, would already be a very happy person, you know. So in terms of the Lam Rim, the very first level of reality, Buddha talks about karma. Of course, he talks about it in terms of being a practice. He suggests we don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, don't this, don't that, don't harm others. And you must ask him, why not, Buddha? Don't just do what he says. It's ridiculous. You don't have to say, don't smoke. You have to say, oh, all right. You say, please tell me why, give me the logical reasons, and she'll tell you, it'll give you cancer, baby. You don't want cancer, so you'll take her advice. Then you'll prove it to be true yourself eventually from experience. So the same with the Buddha. He's not a creator. Jesus said, don't kill. Why? You ask him, he says, because God said so. I'm not complaining. Buddha says, don't kill. Why? Because, honey child, have you noticed people don't like getting killed? It's called a natural law. But the reason he exhorts us at the beginning to abide by the laws of karma is because it's going to cause me suffering in the future because we produce ourselves. So the very first level is this law of cause and effect, and karma is a brilliant example of this first level of dependent arising, that things come into existence in dependence upon causes. Then the second level, we discussed this one. Let's go into our movie. See what we're moving into this one now. The second level at which things exist interdependently, dependent arising being the label given to how things exist conventionally. Now we're kind of homing into a more subtle level of conventional reality of how this person exists, the very nature of this person, how they function, how they exist, how I exist, really kind of internally, precisely. This is the second level at which I exist. The first one is I exist in dependence upon my past causes. This already can loosen the grip of ego grasping, because the way we feel about I now is as if someone's given it to me. Someone made me, God or somebody plopped me on this planet, then gives me happiness and gives me suffering. No, with no idea why. No wonder we panic. That's not how it is at all, Buddha says. Not like that. The I is not like that at all. From a Buddha's view is, you're the product of your own past causes, baby. You're the cause. You made yourself. Dalai Lama says karma is like self-creation. It's so powerful. That already can bring profound changes experientially. You can start growing up and stop blaming others and realize you create yourself. How marvelous. How delicious. Now we get to the next level, dependent arising, really homing in. How does this I exist? It's the same for the mug and everything else. So the second level of dependent arising is I exist in dependence upon my bits and pieces, my parts. A mug exists in dependence upon the bits and pieces. And you won't find mug anywhere among those bits and pieces, because mug is the label we give, impute upon those bits and pieces. So I is the label. The subtlest level of dependent arising is that I exists. I is the name imputed upon those parts. But we have to do the investigating of the parts in order to find, and this is the biggest misconception, where what we think is a little intrinsic I in here, like running the show. This is the deepest mistake we make. This is the root cause, the root misconception that causes all the other misconceptions. We believe in the depths of our being that there is in here somewhere, among all these bits and pieces, a very, very special bit that's called I. And Buddha says, don't be ridiculous. There is no such bit called I. And you don't, honey, you don't need one. So can't just believe him. We have to prove it. So there's logical deductions here. So you first just have to establish the parameters of this investigation, because the Buddha's telling us that we are made of bits and pieces. And what are those bits and pieces? It's very simple. There's body and mind. They're the bits and pieces. They're the bits and pieces that make you up. There's body and there's mind. That's it. The Christians and the Muslims say there's a third piece called a soul, and that's the piece that Buddha says doesn't exist. It's an extra piece on top. It's like an extra piece of bell and whistle that you don't need. It's an invention. And the label for it philosophically is an intrinsic me, a me that is not depending upon the parts, is not depending on causes, and is not depending on the mind calling it I. That is the misconception. They're the three levels of dependent arising, Buddha says. That are misconceptions. So we have to investigate, we have to drill down and use logic to argue with these absurd misconceptions. Why? Because this is the source of all our suffering, the source of all our future suffering lives, the source of what we do to harm others, the source of the universes, the source of samsara, you name it. So the first thing to establish, Buddha's telling us there's no little separate little piece called I there. Can't just believe it. We've got to, but the first step is we've got to establish, this is the part that's tricky. The first step, there's a 4-point analysis. The first step is you've got to establish clearly in your mind what you think the I is, how you think the I appears to you. This is really difficult because you say, well, Buddha says there isn't one, and now you want me to look at how it exists. You have to think, because we believe so utterly, it's implicit. It has been there for eons, Buddha says. It absolutely underpins everything we've said and done and thought, all the lives we've had, all the suffering we've had, is this implicit belief that we practice to perfection, that there is an intrinsic me in there. Our language expresses it perfectly. I have a nose. I am angry. The word I is the main player in our head, isn't it? See, this is the point. This is the thing. If I say, I have a cup, you've got to first establish what that means. You hear me say the words, I have a cup. Here I am. I have a cup. I'll say those words. So if I'm speaking the truth, you have to look at that, look here for where the sound is coming, know English, recognize the label cup, recognize the label I, and establish that that's a fact or not. You will establish conventionally it is a fact. We know the meaning of mug, we know the meaning of I, so I have a mug is a valid statement. Tick the box. You just spoke the truth. That's it. Very simple. That means if it's a true statement, I said two nouns, didn't I? I said I, a pronoun, and then mug. So if that's a true statement, you have to be able to point out two phenomena, each of which is not the other, each of which in this case is simply not dependent upon the other for its existence. That's easy. Put the mug there, Robina can drop dead, the mug is just fine. It will continue to hold tea. You put, the mug will collapse, Robina is just fine, continue to create causes and karma. They're separate and independent. There are two phenomena. That's simple, conventional truth. Well, I will say I have an ear. How many nouns? I, ear. And the same logic has to apply. If it's true, even conventionally, you have to point out an ear that is not an I and doesn't depend upon the I. That we can do. Look, the first one, there is an ear here that isn't the I. It functions to hear things. That's the ear. Now, where's the second one? Where's the I? That's separate from the ear and that doesn't depend upon the ear. That's the one you can't find. But that's the one we believe utterly exists. This is a gross example of it. We assume that the I is the owner. I have an ear, a nose, of this, and anger, love, compassion. I am this, and I am that, and I did this, and how dare you do that to me, blah, blah. We say like that. Well, this is the first mistake. There are two mistakes. This is the first one. We believe the I is an owner. But there is a piece in here that it isn't the ear, and indeed is not all the other thousands of pieces. That's why I like to use the IKEA example. You go to IKEA and buy a box of one Robina, please. And you'll be very disappointed. You get a bit of part. You get millions of parts, won't you? But you get millions of parts, millions of bits and pieces that you have to construct. And this is the kind of analysis you do in meditation, but reverse. Because, you don't buy a box of bits. You get born as a whole piece and you have to unpack the bits to try to find that special piece in there that is called the I, that is existing not independently, not depending on the other parts. You won't find such a piece. You can't find such a piece. Because if there were a piece in here, it's called I. So you've got your left breast, your right breast, your toe, your nails, your eyelashes, all the ear, all the bits. And there's going to be millions of pieces. And you can construct them perfectly into this perfect looking I, looking just like Robina. But we think for it to be a real person, you've got to have a piece called I, somehow plugged in here somewhere between the breasts, somewhere around about here, isn't it? Where we think the I is. We're not quite sure because we never located, we never bothered to look. We just assumed this owner. That's what they mean by soul, spirit, all these words. Misconception. It's a bell and whistle that we've added, that it has no function. The I doesn't have that separate I, a separate I, an independent I, an I that doesn't depend upon ear, an I that's different from the ear and is just in there somehow. It doesn't have a function. And it's a powerful point about everything having a function. My right breast has a function. My left breast has a function. My pancreas. It seems like you can have some pieces that don't have function, but generally speaking, they have a function. Your right toe this way. Each of the millions of pieces all work beautifully together to function as Robina, don't they? Think of it this way. When everything's working in the computer, it functions as a computer. As soon as something's wrong, the whole thing collapses. So when all the bits and pieces are working perfectly, you've got a Robina working nicely. But we assume it won't be a real Robina until you find this little kind of Ziploc bag with written in gold, I on it. So you put the breast in, the toe, the nail, this, the eyelash, the ear, the drums, the pee-pee, the caca, all the millions of pieces. But you're convinced it's not going to be a real eye until you find that one special piece. And you're panicking as you put the eye together because there won't be one. And you ring up IKEA panicking, where's the eye? You don't need one, honey. I promise. Don't worry about it. It'll function perfectly as a Robina without any eye. That's reality, Buddha says. And there's not the subtlest one yet. If there were a little piece called I, in just the same way that if this piece, the whole one, in relation to these two, there is one called I and one called mug. That's it. That's easy. So the I can collapse and die, and the mug will still function. That means they're independent and they're separate. Here, we're looking at the components now of this one called I. And we're convinced in there's a special piece called I that runs the show. So if there were that special piece, then when you insult my nose, oh, Robina, what an ugly nose you've got. My nose will be really offended, and the I will go, oh, phew, I'm glad you didn't insult me, because it's separate. I mean, it's hilarious, but it's true. If it was separate. If it were separate, like the mug won't break if Robina dies, because they're separate. So if there is I mean, when your nose breaks, your ear doesn't feel it. When your nose breaks, your ear can still listen. When your right foot gets cut off, your left foot's fine. They're separate. Simply speaking, they're separate. They don't depend upon each other. In simple sense. So same with the mug and Robina, they're separate. So one does not depend upon the other. But this is more nuanced, because you won't find a separate I that isn't dependent upon the parts. But there is an I, but isn't separate and is not independent. And you can't separate. So there is an I, and this is the third one, finally, searching for this I that's separate from the parts, that has equal status along with the parts, as my friend Pende says, is walking hand in hand with the other parts. You won't find that because it doesn't exist and you don't need it. It's a bell and whistle you've added, like you've added a creator to the universe. It's a bell and whistle that you don't need. It's not valid, Buddha says. We don't need an I to run the show. We don't need a creator to run the show. It's a dualistic view that we've added. It's a misconception, Buddha says. So that it leads us to the subtlest one, that I does exist as a mere name imputed by our mind on the valid parts. That's how I exist. You won't find it. You can't locate it because we want to locate it as separate from the others. You can't do that. It won't exist. It's not like that. So as Lama Zopa says, this is the two truths now together. So you posit, depending on arising I, it depends on causes, depending upon parts, and then you establish in your meditation, your analysis, that you can't find an independent I, an I that's independent of the parts. These two are independent. These are easy. These two are independent. But within here, they're all dependent upon. The I exists in dependence upon all the parts working smoothly. And so the conclusion, the third one is that there's no I There's no I that doesn't exist and depends upon causes. There's no I that doesn't depend upon parts. And there's no I that doesn't depend upon the mind labeling it I. That's the final conclusion. So establishing there's no that I is emptiness. The absence of that I. The absence of the fantasy I. And that's the revelation. Then you will realize subtle dependent arising, merely labeled I. As His Holiness says, the I isn't empty of existing from its own side because you can't find it. You won't find it. I is empty of existing from its own side because it's a dependent arising. So dependent arising and emptiness can't separate one without the other. Inextricable. Flip sides of the same coin. Lord Buddha says, form, or let's use any word, I is empty. We'll spell it out. Dependent arising I is empty of existing from its own side. And you flip it over. The emptiness of the existence from its own side of the I is the I, dependent arising I. So I is empty, emptiness is I. I is nothing other than emptiness, and emptiness is nothing other than the I. So you can't have dependent arising without emptiness, because dependent arising infers emptiness, and emptiness infers dependent arising. As Lama Zopa says, when you realized the absence, the emptiness, the lack of that fantasy I, that from the side of the I, here, the label I refers here, from the side of the I, all the bits and pieces, you will find not one atom of an I. But, and it's as if, when you realize the emptiness of I, it's as if there is no I. But dependent arising, there is an I. But what does exist is so subtle, it's as if it doesn't. It's putting the two truths together. So the method for realizing finally how nothing has an intrinsic nature, the method is to establish things as existing conventionally. Emptiness is like the result, the conclusion you come to from thinking about dependent arising. So we have to establish from the Buddha what does exist. What does exist? First, conventionally. So Buddha's view simply presents this. Not creator, it's called karma. There are the various realms of existence because the mind goes to more subtle levels and we create karma. And then because all minds are conjoined with their own set of the four elements, and then due to certain negative karma, you might get reborn as what's called a spirit, which has the predominance of air energy. And you can't see air, so you won't be able to see a spirit. Because its mind, due to its negative karma, is conjoined with the four elements, but the predominant element, you could argue, is the air energy. A god in the high realms of existence of enormous bliss as a result of virtue. Their mind is conjoined with the four elements, but their mind, the elements are so pure, it's like subtle light due to virtue. So we're establishing first conventionally karma, different realms of existence, the mind, the delusions, the virtues, bodhicitta. This is all Buddha's presentation of how things exist conventionally. Then we finally get drilled down into the I in particular, but to all phenomena in general, and discover how each of them in their own nature exists ultimately. It's something like that. I forget what the question was. Eileen, I'm sorry, it's a long answer. All right, Eileen? Good. Thank you, darling. Any questions, Gina? This is Buddha's view. So I can tell you is Buddha's view. So you might be wrong. You have to find out. Any questions? No? What time is it? Maybe I finished already. What time is it? 2:30. I've got another half an hour to go. Okay, come on. Question 9. You have to talk now. I've been talking for an entire hour non-stop.
I have a question.
No, darling. Talk to me. What's your name?
Kyle.
Kyle. Good, Kyle. Talk to me, sweetheart.
How do I get over anger towards my ex?
Start again, darling.
How do I get over anger towards my ex for leaving me?
Oh, darling. We all understand. We've got to go right back to we've got to go back to junior school. We've got to go back to high school here. So, well, no, first we've got to go back to junior school. I'll just give you the technical answers, all right, and we can play with it. Well, the first thing about the very first level of reality for the Buddha is the level of karma. Is that your consciousness, which we label at the moment is called Kyle, isn't it? On the basis of joining this mind with this body, your mummy probably called you Kyle, unless you called yourself Kyle, did you? Your mummy did. Your mummy?
Other things too.
What, darling? What?
Other things.
I bet she did, yes. And so did your ex. No. So let's say the label Kyle refers to this person. Okay. So this is made up of body and mind. So this consciousness called Kyle's consciousness, we can track it back to conception of your mummy's womb. We know the Buddha would say your body came from your mummy and daddy, but your conscious didn't. That went before. And you came programmed with all your tendencies. So if you look at your mind now, you can see you've got some nice tendencies. You're quite a nice fellow, perhaps. You're fairly patient, but you've got naughty ones as well. Join the universe. They're called anger, resentment, jealousy, how unfair, mean and nasty. You with me? You with me? So then we've got this combination of different states of mind. They're all Kyles. You did not get them from mummy and daddy. You brought them with you. They're yours. So the whole teaching about karma, the Buddhist approach to karma, using it as your practice, is you begin to own your own experiences, you own your anger, you own your jealousy. So why? So the simplest answer to the Buddha's question, why am I angry? We're not discussing your boyfriend, your girlfriend, or your dog friend. We're very flexible these days. I presume it's a person. So boyfriend, you said person, or I forgot what you said. Doesn't matter what you said. Whoever it is, your partner. We're not discussing that person. We're discussing you. We're discussing you now. Do you understand this? We're discussing Kyle. So Kyle came into this life, this is the first one of karma, with his own tendency, which includes his anger, his hurt, his jealousy, his kindness, his goodness, his being, whatever it might be. Do you understand? It's your mind. So already when you take the view of karma as your hypothesis and you try to apply it every day, then you start to own your own qualities, you own your goodness and your badness. You with me? Rather than believing it's not fair, how dare he do this to me? I'm an innocent victim, I didn't ask to get born, which is the view of ego. We have that view very instinctively, don't we? The things are unfair. We have that view. You agree? Right. That's a major way we suffer. So the second way about karma is the one, a more intense one, is that karma is this natural law for the Buddha that runs the universe. It's a natural law that runs the universe. No one runs it. It's not punishment. It's not reward. There's no punisher and there's no rewarder. It's a natural law. And we're all kind of living within that law. So then not only are your tendencies yours, but another way our karma plays out is in terms of who we meet and how they see us and treat us. Now, you know, in your life, probably some good things have happened. Would you agree? People have been loving and kind, and, you know, not everybody punches you in the nose every day. And some people are kind to you and smile at you. And you understand we have lots of good things happening, but we tend not to question why those things happen. We sort of take them for granted. It's only when the bad things happen that we have a panic attack, isn't it? Do you agree? And so so then not only are your tendencies yours, you brought those with you from practicing them, your good and your bad, but you also got very strong history with different sentient beings. And it's not accidental. You didn't get that mummy by accident. You ran like a magnet to that womb. You got that mother, that father, and everybody you've met up until now, the way they treat you and see you, that also is the fruit of your past actions. So all the good things that have happened to you, that's the fruit of your virtue. If we thought of that every day, we'd all be blissed out. And we'd handle the bad things, but we take the good for granted, and then we have a panic attack about the bad. So I'm just telling you about the view of karma, which for a person who really applies this already becomes an antidote that enables us to bear the pain of when bad things happen, because we have a logical reason for why it happened. And that sort of calms the crazy mind down, because why we suffer so badly is because we think we don't deserve it. I didn't do anything to deserve it. And this life you might not have. You might have not done one single negative thing to this person, but it's due to past karma that things play out. This is just the Buddha's analysis. I'm just giving you this analysis. And this is a theory. But like theories, you try and practice it, you know. So the courage that comes from taking this on board as an antidote to the pain in life is that, well, you learn to own it and take responsibility for it and stop feeling like a victim and know that we created the cause of it. And that means that I'm sick of this suffering and I'm not going to create any more of this suffering. You understand what I'm saying? So thinking a bit like that, that's a karmic one. But then you've got to drill down. And the answer to why a person harmed you is because you must have harmed them. But the answer to why anybody's ever been kind to you or good to you or loving is because you've also done that to them. So it's sort of like a natural law of whatever happens to us is from the result of what we've done, good and bad. It's important to put the good in there as well. That's the answer from the point of view of karma, from the Buddha's answer. Just technically, that's the answer. Now, if you're a devoted Christian, it's all God's will, isn't it? It's whatever view you like, you know. So that's the Buddhist answer. So then how to deal with the pain, isn't it? So then we have to drill down into the mind itself and look at what it is in the mind that causes us to experience pain at that moment. So that means we have to understand the Buddha's analysis of the mind. So the Buddha's view of the mind is really clearly laid out, goes quite in depth. We've got neurotic, deluded, unhappy, painful states of mind. They're called attachment, anger, jealousy, low self-esteem. We all know them. And then we have valid states of mind, virtuous ones, love, compassion, kindness, self-confidence. We know those too. And the reason we suffer is for the first lot, not the second lot. So why we suffer when the object we've been attached to then unattaches themselves from us is because we have enormous attachment for that person, which includes emotional hunger for their presence, emotional hunger for their approval of me. It means you want to be near them all the time and have them. We assume they belong to us. We possess. All of these are the suffering of attachment. So because of that being thwarted when this person leaves you, it is devastating. Do you understand? Are we communicating here? This is Buddhist analysis. So as a Buddhist, you try to work with this and try to counteract these things. And so one of the main sufferings of attachment, more than for sex, drugs, and rock and roll, is attachment to being seen and heard as a nice boy. We've been wanting that since we're born. And the way we suffer is so unbearable because we assume that attachment at that level assumes I'm not worthy unless someone loves me. So no wonder we're devastated when someone gives us up because we assume then I must be a bad person. No wonder we kill ourselves. All misconceptions, all bullshit, Buddha says. Are we communicating, Carl? We recognize anything? You human being, join the universe. So it's the application of all these theories that a Buddhist would attempt to do, you know, and try to heal the wounds and give up the attachment and the anger and become our own person and develop love and wisdom and compassion and blah, 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 blah. Was it just recent?
6 months ago.
And your heart is still a bit broken?
Yeah.
Okay. How are you working with it? Any of these views are making sense? Or you're already applying some of these views, trying to accept the reality of it? Oh, you're turning it all against yourself, though. That's often what we do. We assume because someone says it leaves us, we must be a bad person. That's the worst assumption of all. It's so utterly not true. That's the deepest one, I think, for all of us. Don't you agree? What do you think?
It's hard to say, honestly. The anger comes out of me like at moments. Like,
yes.
Like I'm exhaling. It just
right.
Like
yes.
I had no control over it.
Yes. About the person,
yeah.
About to other people or to yourself?
Usually to myself.
Okay, right. Yes.
Wow.
We all know that, don't we? So that's the pain. See, when we realize that anger, or even the more subtle level of it, simply aversion, or even can become depression, is the response when attachment isn't getting what it wants. Because attachment is like this, to be very brutal, attachment is multifaceted, but it's like a junkie in us that assumes that we're only half a person, assumes we have to have other people to make us feel valid, and then is outraged when it doesn't get what it wants, and shocked and horror. So anger is the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants, which is to have people love us and like us and stroke us and give us everything we want every second. It's like a greedy little vampire in there, you know. So we get outraged. How dare he do that to me? I don't deserve it. That's how anger feels, isn't it? Would you agree with that?
It feels unfair.
That's exactly right, because you did nothing to deserve it. This is true. This is a common way we all suffer. The Buddhist view is we created all these causes from the past, but we just don't remember. I mean, I like the analogy of karma. Buddha uses the thing of seeds and fruits all the time. Everything you think and do and say is like programming your mind, sowing seeds in your mind. And everything you experience in your life is the fruit of those seeds. So you know very well, if you look in your garden, there's a weed there. It is your garden. You mightn't remember planting the bloody weed, but it's your garden, so it's your weed. When you own your life as your garden, whatever's in it, whatever comes in it, you somehow put it there from the past. And we have to assume a past here. That's why the idea of reincarnation is so helpful in Buddhism, just as a concept. Then you begin to own it and stop feeling like it's not fair. It takes time, Kyle. This is just the analysis one would use, in every day. And the big one, though, is to know logically that who Kyle is has got zero to do with this person's actions. Even this person strokes you all day and thinks you're wonderful, it doesn't say who Kyle is. And even if they punch you in the nose, it's not saying who Kyle is. We have to discover our own person. I love that phrase. We have to become our own person. And when we become more whole inside by less attachment and less fear and less jealousy, then, as our mothers would say, did you say it in America? Sticks and stones can break your bones, but words can never hurt you. Did you say that one? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's easy to say all these words when the world is shitty and people do harm us, and there is sexism and racism and drama and suffering like unbelievable. It's hard to hear it. Are we communicating, Kyle?
Yes.
So become your own person, sweetheart. Then slowly, though, this is what practice is. This is a real on the earth way of seeing it all. All right. Good, darling. Thank you so much. Anybody here? Something to say? Where are we? Yes. Yes. Hello there.
Hi.
Hello, darling. Talk to me.
Can I want to ask something really basic, sort of like,
Of course.
why meditate? Because I've been meditating for decades and I'm still a mess. And I can't meditate. Like I did it this morning and my mind was like going all over.
I understand. So there's a bunch of it. I'm sure we've talked about this before. There's a bunch of assumptions in your mind that are the problem. So your assumption is because you've been meditating for years, you should be better than you. That's what you're saying, isn't it? That's what you're saying.
And meditate.
That's what you're saying.
Yes.
Well, that's the mistake. You're not worse than you are. I mean, if you've been doing some practice every single day, you've been sowing amazing seeds in your mind, and you're seeing your mind. So what do you do when you see? Sort of like you've never heard of botany, and you look at what's growing out there, you don't even notice it. When you start to learn botany, suddenly you realize how many weeds you've got. You're shocked. Well, you don't get depressed about it. You then start to pull them out and have a method to pull them out. Well, so see your mind. You've got to see your mind. You've got to see your mind and label accurately what's there, but not be depressed about it and think you should be better. You're not better. You are who you are. And you just keep working on it long term and then delight in your progress. Isn't that a better view? Would you be prepared to think that view? I'm sure we've had this exact conversation before.
Yes.
Have we not?
Yes.
Can't you hear it? Can you hear it? I feel like I'm doing a broken record here. Can you, sweetheart, just like the rest of us, we all have the default assumption that we're not good enough. It's like you've been doing gardening for years and all you do is see the weeds. You're not even noticing the good stuff. You're not even noticing all the flowers. This is really a tragic mistake we all make. Are we communicating, sweetheart?
No, it's just that I feel like I'm wasting my time because it's the same thing over and over and over. It doesn't progress.
So, okay, we've had this conversation. I've had it just now, but I have to ask you the question. You just said exactly the same problem. You ignored what I just said. So let me ask you a question. I have to do this. Do you have any good qualities?
Yes.
And you see them?
Sometimes.
That's exactly right. Well, how about painting a new picture of yourself? I'm not being sarcastic. It's very simple. You've got a picture of yourself now, and if you wrote it all down, you'd probably have 90% of the bad things. I mean, most of us are like that. So how about painting a new picture of yourself? I'm not joking now. I'm being very simple and serious, but you've got to practice wanting. You've got to want to do that, and you've got to have some conviction that it's true, that you've actually got good qualities. And if you have been practicing all these years, you've been doing some weeding all these years, and you're seeing your mind. And then the fact that you think your mind shouldn't be deluded is the mistake. It's only when you've really got single point of concentration that you start to get some real joy in seeing the virtues prevailing. So you've got to be more humble with yourself. Are you hearing my words? What do you think? When you try and practice seeing some good qualities, because they're all there. Don't you think? Other people can see them. But the irony of ego is we love to point out the bad ones. This is really the tragedy of ego.
Right, like you're saying about, we take for granted the good things.
That's right.
And, yeah, no, totally. I was having lunch yesterday and I was sort of like, oh, it's okay, it's not great and it's not bad. Because I expect lunch to be great.
That's
all
right.
the time.
That's right. I mean, the fact is, like, I know this is a tragedy, isn't it? I know. It really does mean getting a bit more humble with ourselves, a bit more kind and soft. And practice, we've got to practice those new thoughts. It's very simple, but it's difficult because we forget. We go to the default ones every time. What do you think? Keep moving. All right.
Thank you.
What else, people? Are we going for time? 2:40. Anybody else? Questions? Yes, Brenda, darling. Give Brenda the mic.
Kind of random. Sure. What is Buddhist view on dreams?
Who?
Dreams. Buddhist view on dreaming.
That's your subtle mind.
And
That's your subtle mind for a start. Your subtle mind, which is more capable. If we trained ourselves, we'd have much more power. But that's the level of mind that can see the past, can see the future. And of course, it makes up all these stories, but it's just visions in your mind, from your own mind. And it can be past things coming up. It can be seeing in the future. It can be, but if you think about your dreams, you can often see signs of things going on inside yourself, I think. Would you agree with that? I mean, sometimes the way they even talk about dreams, like say, you're working very hard. You're working hard on your mind. You might have a dream of enormous fear. That'd be a really good dream because your ego's panicking. So the stuff that a friend of mine, she is very disciplined, very controlled, very disciplined behavior, is not out of control, does a lot of things, is able to handle many things, but would have the most hideous dreams, like nightmarish dreams of suffocating and almost, and then eventually she discovered, because it's now coming up as panic attacks, that it's her suppressed. She was very good at suppressing. Very good behavior, very good discipline. That's great. But suppressing all her anxiety, it's now vomiting up and vomiting out, which is fantastic. She's now discovering it. So the dreams are going away. Because you can't, everything goes on, everything stays in your mind. You can't escape it.
so the dreams are part of the mind.
Your mind, your subtle mind. Well, no, okay. You have a body and you have a mind. So the way to say, for me, without insulting neuroscientists, about the function of the brain is that it's a physical indicator of what's going on in the mind. It's the way to say it. It's like the sign, it's like the board with all the buttons on it. It's not the electricity itself. It's just, it's a sign. You can see it's a physical sign of what goes on in your mind. So things do go on in your brain. Of course they do, because your mind and your brain are connected. Do you see what I'm saying? So your brain is just an indicator, as I would put it that way, of what's going on in your mind, which isn't physical. Because you can have, your mind is, and that's just still the grosser level. You can have levels of mind that don't depend upon your brain. Like I mentioned, when you get single point of concentration, this state of mind that's very subtle, if you saw a person who was in that state of mind, they would look like they were dead. No breathing, brain stopped, like death. But they've gone to their subtle level of mind. It's not mystical. Are we communicating? Okay, good. All right. What else, people? But I mean, Kyle's point, is the main one in our lives. Is the pain of the things that go wrong, isn't it? I mean, because you're seeing your own bad qualities all the time, you think you're bad, think you're a load of rubbish. No matter how hard you practice, it's still a load of rubbish. It's not like you've been doing your weeding for 25 years and you go, oh, my garden's still hopeless. Can you only imagine how much worse you'd be if you hadn't practiced all these years? So be happy. God Almighty. Are we communicating? Come on, please. So it's like the pain is, and the main one is, why do bad things happen to us? I think that's the real reason why we suffer. The pain of when bad things happen, the pain of when attachment doesn't get what it wants. So you probably didn't ever know. We don't even know we have all this emotional hunger. We don't even know we have this assumption that I'm nothing unless someone praises me, but it's clear when we analyze it. And the only time we notice it is when we don't get it. So you took this for granted, this relationship, and then you assume because the person loves you, you must be worthwhile. Now they've rejected you, you think you're a creep. There's no logic whatsoever. Do you understand my point? But that's how we feel, isn't it? It's hilarious. All that's doing is pointing to the deepest level of attachment, this hunger to be seen and approved of since we're born. Since you're a little boy, you've been craving mummy and daddy and everybody else's love, but everybody's got this. This is the deepest attachment of all. You see what I'm saying? That's why we suffer so badly. So we have to heal ourselves. It doesn't happen overnight, but we recognize the pain. In other words, we've got to look at the logic. Sometimes look to be logical. We've got to ask ourselves, what is it about my mind, my thoughts, let's say? I mean, when we get lonely, it's because we're having all these thoughts and I've got no one to share them with. We feel that, don't we? Because I mean, if we look at our mind, we're talking to people all the time. You're having an experience and you want to be telling somebody. And because you haven't got somebody to tell, you think, oh, I must be a no good person. It's quite demented. So we've got to ask ourselves, what is it about all my thoughts and my experiences that aren't valid until someone else hears them? I mean, it's completely ridiculous. Are you hearing me, Kyle? In other words, this, you could be a half a person wandering around looking for someone to love you, and I'm a half a person wandering around looking for someone to love me. We both prop each other up in this nonsense. And because I don't approve of you, and I'm a creep as well. Because I don't approve of you, you must think you're bad, but I'm already hopeless. It's like we're ridiculous. I say funny things, but are we communicating? Are we communicating, Kyle? Okay. We are jokes. We are ridiculous. I mean, attachment was like the symptom of a half a person, half a person. It's very funny. Blah, blah, blah. Yes, Mary. Not enough. This morning, as she's getting more. We're on in India because it's Days of Miracles now, isn't it? So we had some talk in India this morning, and she was there at 8:30. So here you are again.
I was, and I'm tired. But I have a different question completely,
Darling,
which is if you could talk a little bit about unexpected experiences that you might have in meditation, something that just comes out of nowhere, and you didn't expect it, you weren't anticipating it or looking for it or creating it or something.
Experience. You're talking about a nice experience.
Something like an out-of-body moment or something like that.
That's just because you're sitting there quietly and your grosser mind kind of calms down for a minute, and then that's your subtle mind. That's the kind of experiences we have. People call them literally out of body. It's your subtle mind. You're just having an experience from your subtle level, and it feels like you're out of your body, but you're not. It just, because the subtle mind it feels like that. When people have out of body experiences, it feels like that, but you're not out of your body. But it just means it's a subtle mind. For a moment, you had a taste of it. And that's good. Nothing.
Is that a preview, or is that a memory, or how do you?
It's not a memory. It's just an experience of your mind at a more subtle level for a moment. But don't get carried away. It's okay. It's nice.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Okay.
All right, darling. Samia, come talk to me, sweetheart. And then Jim. Hello, darling.
Getting myself off mute. Good morning.
What time are you?
It's 7, but I've been up since 4 because there was a memorial for a friend in San Francisco that was on at 4 o'clock.
I see. You went to that. Good, darling. So talk to me, sweetheart.
Now I'm here.
Okay. Good.
So following on from, I don't know who the man was that was talking earlier. Let's see, Jim maybe, or
Kyle.
Melvin, I can't see. Kyle, and this.
There's Kyle.
Hello, Kyle. I had a week just this last week where the experience was all of those things, very alone, feeling big, it's 2.5 years where I can barely leave the house unless I have help, feeling all that, I don't see people anymore. Oh yes, they're just going on with their lives. I understand that. That's how it is.
Rejected, you mean, and not approved of and not supported by other people. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think just that I just really felt that pain of not being in the world anymore and all the sort of.
You mean lonely? Not having human contact, not having people loving you and supporting you. Is that what you're saying?
I guess so, yes.
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 So-
And the antidote for that, when you're really heavily in it, which sometimes I do, because it's like I can't be in those places with those people, and life goes on and I'm here. So
because what? So is it because you're physically sick as well? Is that part of the problem? Because you got lots of-
yeah, because I physically can't go to places, and so it's sometimes it's almost like a sense like I've already left the world.
I understand. So
Um,
from this,
so I guess my question is, like, when I'm in that, a lot of the time I'm okay, but when that hits me and it can be so overwhelming, I'll go to practice, but even sometimes I can't do that. Is there, like, what would you suggest? Like, what is the best antidote for that?
I understand. There's different approaches, I mean, there's different approaches. These either can continue to work on your mind and learn to know that you are okay as you are, and fulfill your own qualities and become your own person, and rejoice in your good qualities and rejoice in your practice, and know that your very existence is already worthwhile for the world. The other approach is you can have more compassion and take all this suffering of your own and think, oh my God, can you imagine the suffering of so many other people? And you use it as grist for the mill for you to have compassion for others. And then if you can, you're even more progressive than that, you can put it into practice and start doing things to help other people, which already you're doing. So rejoice in the fact that you're helping others and doing. So there's many ways of seeing it yourself in a more optimistic way. Do you understand, darling? That's really, it's like when I say, what's your name again, Jim? Suyen. So Suyen's one about always thinking he's doing is no matter how much weeding is done, it's still a lousy garden. I think that one too, sort of start rejoicing in what you are doing and what you have achieved and what you are doing. That can lift you. And then, I mean, you've done so much and are doing still so much. So this view, I've left the world already, can get a bit depressing, and it's not true. Do you understand, darling? Paint a different picture.
Yeah.
Paint a different picture, darling. Please.
Yeah. No, I think I do that a lot, those two things. And I guess what you're saying is, I guess the thing is, like, even though I can do that, the karmic seed is that sometimes I feel overwhelmed by those feelings, and I just have to keep practicing with them and go, okay, well,
try and keep, all we can do is that, and then get what support you can and do what you can to help others, but to see to see things in a better way. This is why, like, I talk about my friends in prison who are like, they don't have the luxury of anything. It's like you're in prison, but they've found ways to be more optimistic and more positive. That's the one thing we all have to do, because life is suffering. Terrible things do happen. We have to find new ways of interpreting it, of painting a picture of it. Otherwise, we get very caught up in our own picture and it spirals downwards. Do you understand?
Yes, I think I understand being in prison, because I feel like I'm in a very nice one.
No, there you go, darling. At least that much.
Comfy bed. Freedom. Yeah, I understand that analogy very well.
Yeah, good. Okay. So
Thank you.
Good. It's time to go home. We've done 90 minutes.
Time to sleep.
So people, all we can do is keep moving. All I'm doing is presenting the Buddha's view. Well, all I can tell you, it's up to us what we do with it, And the point of all these thoughts, these concepts, these viewpoints is to be used as our way of interpreting. And that means we have to look at why we suffer is because we have these other interpretations. It's hard to see that, It's very hard. But all we can do is keep working and rejoicing in our good qualities. We've got to rejoice in our good qualities. And this is the fundamental one, to know that who I am isn't defined by how I'm seen. These words are so powerful. We are not who we other people see. So why, like I said to Kyle, why we suffer so painfully when we're rejected is because we assume I need their approval and their presence to show me I'm a valid person. That's quite schizophrenic, but that's how we all are. And it's just not true. So these experiences, and we're brave enough to force us to become our own person, to force us to see our good qualities and learn to be content and fulfilled in ourselves. That's really the first stages of practice. And then on the basis of this, we can start to have compassion for others and be useful. If we can get that much, then great. Thank you, darling people. Changchob Semchog Rinpoche, Makie Panam Ke Gyuchig, Ke Panyam Pa Me Payang Gong Ne Gong Du Kabashog. That's it, people. Thank you, darlings. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, sweethearts. Bye.
Thank
Jim, I'm
you.
going to answer your question. Where's Jim? Jim never got his question. What
Yeah,
was your
Robina.
question?
Hi, thank you. So I'm the type of person that tends to kind of jump into the middle of a book and start in the middle of the book instead of.
Oh, I see.
And so what I'd really like to find is to get your advice on the real foundational principles of Buddhism and the best place to find that, or best place to start from the ground up.
I understand. Well, I mean, there's so much published out there, and it's hard to get this big picture. But have you been emailing me? Have I got you in my email system?
Yes.
Well, email me, Honey Child, and I'll send you a couple of PDFs. All right.
Okay. Thank you very much.
A good start. Thank you,
Thank
Jim.
you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
darling.
Thank you.
sweetheart. Bye.